inquire, for my own information, whether Mrs. Armadale could tell you what it is her husband wishes me to write, and why it is that he refuses to let her write for him." "There is my thread found, and thank you for finding it," said the doctor. "You shall hear what Mrs. Armadale had to tell me in Mrs. Armadale's own words. 'The cause that now shuts me out of his confidence,' she said, 'is, I firmly believe, the same cause that has always shut me out of his heart. I am the wife he has wedded, but I am not the woman he loves. I knew when he married me that another man had won from him the woman he loved. I thought I could make him forget her. I hoped when I married him. I hoped again when I bore him a son. Need I tell you the end of my hopes? You have seen it for yourself.' Wait, sir, I entreat you. I have not lost the thread again. I am following it inch by inch." "Is this all you know?" I asked. "All I knew," she said, "till a short time since. It was when we were in Switzerland, and when his illness was nearly at its worst, that news came to him by accident of that other woman who has been the shadow and the poison of my life, news that she, like me, had borne her husband a son. On the instant of his making that discovery, a trifling discovery if ever there was one, a mortal fear seized on him. Not for me, not for himself, a fear for his own child. The same day, without a word to me, he sent for the doctor. I was mean, wicked, what you please. I listened at the door. I heard him say, 'I have something to tell my son, when my son grows old enough to understand me. Shall I live to tell it?' The doctor would say nothing certain. The same night, still without a word to me, he locked himself into his room. What would any woman, treated as I was, have done in my place? She would have done as I did. She would have listened again. I heard him say to himself, 'I shall not live to tell it. I must write it before I die.' I heard his pen scrape, scrape, scrape over the paper. I heard him groaning and sobbing as he wrote. I implored him for God's sake to let me in. The cruel pen went scrape, scrape, scrape. The cruel pen was all the answer he gave me. I waited at the door, hours, I don't know how long. On a sudden the pen stopped, and I heard no more. I whispered through the keyhole softly. I said I was cold and weary with waiting. I said, 'Oh, my love, let me in.' Not even the cruel pen answered me now. Silence answered me. With all the strength of my miserable hands I beat at the door. The servants came up and broke it in. We were too late. The harm was done. Over that fatal letter the stroke had struck him. Over that fatal letter we found him paralyzed as you see him now. Those words which he wants you to write are the words he would have written himself if the stroke had spared him till the morning. From that time to this there has been a blank place left in the letter, and it is that blank place which he has just asked you to fill up. In those words Mrs. Armadale spoke to me, in those words you have the sum and substance of all the information I can give. Say, if you please, sir, have I kept the thread at last? Have I shown you the necessity which brings me here from your countryman's death-bed?" "Thus far," said Mr. Neal, "you merely show me that you are exciting yourself. This is too serious a matter to be treated as you are treating it now. You have involved me in the business, and I insist on seeing my way plainly. Don't raise your hands. Your hands are not part of the question. If I am to be concerned in the completion of this mysterious letter, it is only an act of justifiable prudence on my part to inquire what the letter is about. Mrs. Armadale appears to have favoured you with an infinite number of domestic particulars, in return, I presume, for your polite attention in taking her by the hand. May I ask what she could tell you about her husband's letter, so far as her husband has written it?" "Mrs. Armadale could tell me nothing," replied the doctor, with a sudden formality in his manner, which showed that his forbearance was at last failing him. "Before she was composed enough to think of the letter, Her husband had asked for it, and had caused it to be locked up in his desk. She knows that he has since, time after time, tried to finish it, and that, time after time, the pen has dropped from his fingers. She knows, when all other hope of his restoration was at an end, that his medical advisers encouraged him to hope in the famous waters of this place. And last, she knows how that hope has ended, for she knows what I told her husband this morning." The frown which had been gathering latterly on Mr. Neale's face deepened and darkened. He looked at the doctor as if the doctor had personally offended him. "The more I think of the position you are asking me to take," he said, "the less I like it. Can you undertake to say positively that Mr. Armadale is in his right mind?" "Yes, as positively as words can say it." "Does his wife sanction your coming here to request my interference?" "His wife sends me to you, the only Englishman in Wildbad, to write for your dying countryman what he cannot write for himself, and what no one else in this place but you can write for him." That answer drove Mr. Neale back to the last inch of ground left him to stand on. Even on that inch the Scotchman resisted still. "Wait a little," he said. "You put it strongly. But let us be quite sure you put it correctly as well. Let us be quite sure there is nobody to take this responsibility but myself. There is a mayor in Wildbad, to begin with, a man who possesses an official character to justify his interference." "A man of 1,000, said the doctor, "with one fault. He knows no language but his own." "There is an English legation at Stuttgart," persisted Mr. Neale. "And there are miles on miles of the forest between this and Stuttgart," rejoined the doctor. "If we sent this moment, we could get no help from the legation before tomorrow. And it is as likely as not, in the state of this dying man's articulation, that tomorrow may find him speechless. I don't know whether his last wishes are wishes harmless to his child and to others, wishes hurtful to his child and to others, but I do know that they must be fulfilled at once or never, and that you are the only man that can help him." That open declaration brought the discussion to a close. It fixed Mr. Neale fast between the two alternatives of saying yes and committing an act of imprudence, or of saying no and committing an act of inhumanity. There was a silence of some minutes. The Scotchman steadily reflected, and the German steadily watched him. The responsibility of saying the next words rested on Mr. Neale, and in course of time Mr. Neale took it. He rose from his chair with a sullen sense of injury lowering on his heavy eyebrows, and working sourly in the lines at the corners of his mouth. "My position is forced on me," he said. "I have no choice but to accept it." The doctor's impulsive nature rose in revolt against the merciless brevity and gracelessness of that reply. "I wish to God," he broke out fervently, "I knew English enough to take your place at Mr. Armadale's bedside." "Bating your taking the name of the Almighty in vain," answered the Scotchman, "I entirely agree with you. I wish you did." Without another word on either side, they left the room together, the doctor leading the way. End of Chapter 2 of the Prologue.